Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Poonam Gulalia. I am faculty with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The paper that is being discussed is titled Fieldwork and Field Supervision. The module that one is going to be discussing now is titled Content of Fieldwork. I have divided this into two parts. So right now I will be discussing Content of Fieldwork Part 1. The content of this module will flow as follows. One begins with the objectives of the module. This is followed by what is titled as Learning by Doing in the Field. The third is Setting Realistic Goals in the Fieldwork Placement Setting. This will be followed by discussing the need for observation. Lastly, how is interview conducted in the field and how does one plan for an interview with a client? We conclude with the summary of the module. The objectives of this module are as follows. 1. To understand what is meant by content of fieldwork. Secondly, to appreciate the purpose of observation in the field and conducting interviews in the fieldwork setting. Thirdly, to understand learning by doing. To begin with, many student learners are intrigued by the term learning by doing. What does it mean when we say learning by doing in the field? Learning is an active process in which the learner must be involved. In any fieldwork setting, you will need to learn several things. You will need to learn to plan your work in the organization and through the organization where you are placed for fieldwork. You will need to actively work towards selecting certain tasks, certain activities, keeping in mind the organization's profile and the objectives with which the organization works. You will need to set your own learning goals and objectives and work towards them. Learning is an active process in which you as a student learner would need to remain involved. While learning by doing in the field involves the opportunity to engage, the opportunity to question, the opportunity to discuss, to doubt, to differ. All of these will enable you as a student learner to promote your own learning in the field. The next important aspect which one would dwell on is on setting realistic goals in the field. The objectives of the overall tasks undertaken through the agency and at the fieldwork placement setting need to be such that the student is not overwhelmed beyond one's capacity. The tasks or the activities undertaken in the field should be stimulating and motivating besides being challenging. The student should be able to participate in one's own learning and in setting realistic goals in collaboration with the supervisor and the field contacts. In doing so, the student will become aware of one's own expectations, one's own strengths, and one's own limitations. The learning tasks which you finalize for yourself will be such that you can operationalize them in the field and feel sufficiently challenged at the same time. You will learn step by step that learning tasks and the reactions generated from your experiences need to be documented, need to be written down in the form of recordings and reports which need to be submitted as part of the mandate of the fieldwork program. Different goals in the field require different kinds of learning experiences, and these will continue to challenge you and enable you to enjoy your journey in the fieldwork program. In the process of setting realistic goals in consultation with your own mentors and facilitators, you will find that it will help you to think, to develop your own inductive thinking. These processes need to be presented in such a way that specific facts of study of several cases in the field, the behavior of adult clients, all these spaces can be generalized into the principle that adult behavior is meaningful and that adult learners have certain set patterns. Adult learners come with certain set experiences which need to be valued in the field. One of the primary tasks undertaken in the fieldwork setting is that of observation. Observation is largely the purposeful, systematic, and selective way of a student to watch and listen to an interaction or a phenomena in the field. There are many situations which may arise in which observations made by a student learner is appropriate and others in which it is not so appropriate and relevant. Your observation skills will be learnt and tested in spaces such as when you want to learn about interactions in a group. It is here that the classroom teaching of group work, it is here that the classroom teaching of working with individuals will come in handy and will be tested by you as a student learner. There are other examples where you would need to ascertain the functions performed maybe by a field contact or a paraprofessional in the field. So how do your observations help, or how are they appropriate and relevant? These need to be discussed and tested by you as a student learner. The third example is probably to study the behavior or the personality traits of an individual. And herein lies your task where you are challenged to learn from observations. It is appropriate that accurate and complete information be made available to you, and that accurate and complete information be ascertained by you by questioning, by doubting, by interacting with your supervisors, by raising questions in supervisory meetings, and then coming to appropriate conclusions, which may not always be foolproof. When you are more interested in the behavior of individuals in the field, when you are more interested in the perceptions of your own field contacts, the agency staff, the people you interact with, or when you are more involved in the interactions that you have, all of these spaces will enable you, will provide you objective information, and you will need to utilize these along with your observation skills to see whether they are the best method of collecting the required information for you to grow as a student learner. There are largely two types of observation which one will discuss now. One is participatory observation and the other is non-participatory observation. What does one mean when speaks of participatory observation? Participatory observation is when you participate in the activities of the group being observed in the same manner as its own members, with or without their knowing that they are being observed. For example, if an organization is working with the physically challenged, you as a student would be interested in studying the reactions of the general population towards, say, people in wheelchairs. In that case, what would you do? Maybe you could imagine yourself to be physically challenged yourself and required to use a wheelchair. In doing so, you observe the reactions of people you encounter. You make observational notes for your own study which are appropriate. All these are part of participatory observation. Now we come to what is known as non-participatory observation. What does one mean when one says non-participant observer? If you want to study, say, a tribe in a remote area, you may decide to go and live with them in their own households, in the vicinity of their households, and collect the data that you require. In fact, many anthropological studies have been conducting by using this approach. One needs to appreciate the fact that non-participant observation is when you do not get involved with the activities of the group members. You remain a passive observer by watching and listening to the activities and drawing conclusions from that. It can be seen that you are a participant observer. How else can you facilitate your own learning by being a participant observer? You might want to study the functions carried out maybe by nurses in a hospital. As an observer, you could watch their activities, you could follow them as they undertake the activities in the respective hospital, you could record the activities that they undertake as they are performed. It is only after making a number of observations that you would draw certain conclusions about the functions nurses carry out in the hospital. In this manner, any occupational group in any fieldwork setting can be observed and utilized for your own learning. When we observe people as a novice, as a student learner in the making, as a professional in the making, there may be several issues, concerns, or problems which may arise while observing people. What are the problems which are possibly arising for you as a student learner need to be taken into account in this journey of fieldwork? When individuals or group become aware that they are being observed, they may change their behavior. These are part of the learning of human growth and behavior, and therefore we need to connect our theoretical learning, our academic learning of the classroom with the field practice settings. Depending on the situation that the individual or group may encounter, this change could be positive or negative. Where a change in the behavior of the person or group is attributed to them being observed, it is known as Hawthorne effect. The use of observations in such situations may introduce distortions and may impact your understanding. What is observed may not represent in terms of normal behavior. As a student learner, it is possible for you to have certain biases or prejudices which may creep into your observations and may influence your inferences drawn from them. One needs to be mindful of these aspects as one goes along. It also needs to be kept in mind that the interpretations drawn from observations may vary from observer to observer, which means from student to student. There is the possibility of incomplete observation and maybe recording which varies with the method of recording, whether verbal or otherwise. An observer may watch keenly, but at the expense of detailed recording may miss certain non-verbal cues. The opposite problem may occur when the observer takes detailed notes, but in doing so misses some of the interventions which may be taking place in the fieldwork setting. What does it mean for recording our observations, and what does it mean in reporting about our fieldwork practices? There are many ways of recording our own observations in the field. The way observations are recorded also determine whether we are undertaking a quantitative or a qualitative approach. In narrative recordings, which are extremely essential when we undertake fieldwork, the student records descriptions of the interventions of the processes in his or her own words. These narrative recordings come in handy for reflection and supervisory conferences subsequently. Usually, a student makes brief notes while observing the interventions in the field, and after completing the necessary observations, makes detailed notes in the form of narratives. The advantages of narrative recording are such that they enable a student to dwell deeper, to get an insight into the interventions or the processes which have taken place in the field on a day-to-day basis. There are, however, disadvantages of narrative recordings which need to be kept in mind. Some observers may develop a scale in order to rate the various aspects. In the nature of the intervention with a group, there may be positive, negative, or neutral directions. And the main advantage of using scales in recording an observation is that you need to spend time on taking detailed notes and concretize on your observation. On the other hand, one problem with using a scale is that it does not provide specific and in-depth knowledge about the intervention. The other aspect, which is an important component of this module, is the interview process, engaging with people in the field, whether they are individuals, groups, or communities. While engaging with people in the field, you may need to interview a few which serve as a common method of collecting information from people. What do we mean in the fieldwork process when we speak of an interview? An interview is essentially a face-to-face or a person-to-person interaction between two or more individuals with a specific purpose in mind. It involves an interviewer reading questions to the respondents and recording their answers. When you interview a client or a beneficiary, a field contact or a paraprofessional, you have the freedom to choose a format and a context of your questions, choose how to word them, decide how you want to ask them and in what order. The process of asking questions can be flexible or inflexible. Being flexible means you have the freedom to think about and formulate your own questions as they come to your mind. Being inflexible means going with the flow of events. There are two aspects of interviews which need to be understood and appreciated by you as a student learner. One is a structured interview and one is the unstructured interview. The main advantage of conducting an unstructured interview is that you as a student have the complete freedom to decide the structure, the content, the questions and the order of asking the questions that is relevant to the particular situation. You have the freedom to word it, to explore intensively and dig deeper into a situation, a phenomena, an issue or a problem. They are best suited in identifying the diversity and the variety but require a great degree of skill in conducting unstructured interviews. A structured interview is one where there are a predetermined set of questions and you all follow the same wording and the same order of questions as specified in the interview schedule. What is an interview schedule? An interview schedule is a written list of questions which may be open-ended or closed, which are pre-tested for standardized wording, meaning and interpretation required for use by you as a student learner in a person-to-person interaction. One of the benefits of structured interview is that it provides uniform information and assumes the compatibility of data. It requires fewer interviewers than does unstructured interviewing. Now we come to the aspect of planning an interview. The need to plan for an interview with a client or with beneficiaries is essential in a fieldwork setting. Sometimes students, in their energetic and excited way of interacting with people in the field, think that they don't need to plan a purposeful interaction. But one needs to understand that the plan one makes is tentative and needs to be flexible, requires skill and the ability to respond to the concerned clients if and when they raise their concerns, which cannot always be anticipated. In planning an interview with a client, one needs to keep in mind the following parameters. 1. What are the overall goals and objectives of interacting with the client? How will this session or my relation with this client at this time enable me to meet the adequate goals and objectives? Secondly, what needs to be accomplished during the interview or the meeting with the client? Thirdly, what decisions need to be made at the end of this session? Fourthly, should the next contact be a face-to-face interview with the client or telephonic interview? Should it be a one-on-one, a group session, or a family interaction? And who needs to be present? Lastly, in planning an interview with the client, one needs to be known and come to a conclusion about whether other professionals or paraprofessionals are going to be part of the meeting with the client. One of the important aspects of fieldwork practice is providing information and giving advice. As a student, you would need to remind yourself that giving advice and information is extremely easy, but change is difficult. It is quite often that our own clients and client groups are unsure or fearful about taking the step towards making change. A client may resist the idea of using the very important service or advice provided by you through the organization, which you yourself may think is extremely beneficial. In order to ensure appropriate action by the client, you may need to provide the client or the target group with information and advice and allow the client or the client group to dwell over it before coming to a conclusion. Information refers to providing the client with facts and observation so that he, she, or they can make an informed decision. In providing advice, however, you may recommend a certain decision or action. When using the skill of persuasion, as a student, you may use logical arguments to convince a client or a beneficiary that a particular action is important and appropriate and is in their best interest. But ultimately, you would need to follow the principle of self-determination to enable a student, client, or a beneficiary to take the decision in their own best interest. The other important aspect to be kept in mind when providing information and guidance to our clients is to avoid asking inappropriate questions, leading questions which may unnerve the client. Sometimes we ask forthrightly, "Do you understand?" One of the common mistakes made by novices or student learners is to give advice when not required. There are many pitfalls in advice giving, and one needs to be conscious and cautious as a student learner. There are certain guidelines which one could follow in giving advice to clients. 1. Before offering advice to any client, one needs to reflect on how one would feel oneself when someone gives that advice to us. To test whether advice giving is appropriate would depend on the nature and the purpose of the student-client interaction. It would sometimes be essential to try and explain the reason in a logical, rational, mindful manner behind why the advice and the guidance is being offered. You would need to learn to take responsibility for accepting or rejecting the advice given. You would also need to be careful as a student learner of giving advice to a client where he or she may later face consequences, which may have consequences in terms of his personal life, in terms of financial implications. To bring a case to point, if a client asks you, "Do you think I should leave my job?" or "Do you think I should take a divorce?" you would need to be mindful of giving advice which may impact him or her negatively in the long run or have financial implications. You would also need to be alert to the dangers of giving advice to a client who may be manipulative, as also to the dangers of encouraging dependency in a client who would later not take the responsibility of decision making. To summarize this module, one could say that learning by doing is an extremely important aspect of fieldwork. This module has highlighted the importance of learning and practicing observation skills in the field. Moreover, the difference between structured and unstructured interview has been discussed in this module. The interview process has been discussed in detail, which includes preparing for the interview, formulating relevant questions, providing information and advice, and utilizing skills while asking personal questions. This module will be continued as part 2, and I do hope that it has been beneficial for you to understand the content of fieldwork. I would urge you to read the e-text along with the relevant references which have been provided in the same. I look forward to interacting with you and discussing with you further in this regard. Thank you very much.